About ready. Well, welcome everyone to Truckee Meadows Community College. I'm Dr. Karen Hilgersum, the president of Truckee Meadows Community College, and we are so glad that you are here tonight. Thank you. I would like to note first that in addition to our famous speaker that you'll hear in just a few minutes, we have several dignitaries in the audience, and I would like to recognize them very quickly because this night really is all about Dr. Doty, and we're very, very happy that he's here with us tonight. But I do want to recognize some of the individuals who are in the audience. Some of them are new friends to the college, some of them are old friends to the college, and just hold your applause till the end. I'll just be recognizing them very quickly. Some of them helped plan this event, by the way, which is also really, really wonderful. So I practiced this first name. I'm going to give it my best shot. Andy Horsemanhoff. Good enough? Okay, thank you, Andy. Photographer of the Distinguished Speaker Series and poster artist. Anita Lawrence, My Leaders Matter consultant. Clifton Macklin, future, very soon to happen, Institutional Advisory Council member to Truckee Meadows Community College. Dr. Karen Gedney, who's Clifton's wife. Author of a very new book that you'll be able to get in a couple of weeks, I believe, called 30 Years Behind Bars. So we have two MD authors with us tonight, which is pretty amazing to me. Corey Dunn, Distinguished Speaker Series, Community Volunteer. Diane Chesil, I'll say a little bit more about her in a moment. Jeannie Pontrelli, Retired English Professor, Emerita, Distinguished Speaker Series, Community Volunteer. Kevin Cooper, Photographer, Distinguished Speaker Series, Poster Artist. Lauren Klein, Girl Maid. Where'd you go? There you are. Linda Azar, Local Artisan, Distinguished Speaker Series and Community Volunteer. Maria Partridge, Artist Advocate, Burning Man. I don't know if Maria's here, but oh, she's so great. Marisa Brown, Institutional Advisory Council to TMCC. Nancy McCormick, also Institutional Advisory Council to TMCC. Thank you so much for being here. And one of our most distinguished guests tonight, Frankie Sue Del Papa, former Nevada Attorney General and former Nevada Secretary of State. So now let's applause. Thank you all for being here tonight. I want to say that it truly is a pleasure to mention that this speaker is here tonight because of two faculty event leaders. Mayanne McMurray, where is she? Mayanne. I don't know why I did that, because I know your name. And I would like you to stand just for a minute, because this woman's incredible. She works so hard on these events. Thank you. Thank you. You really do help make TMCC stronger and better, and I'm so grateful. And of course, Diane Chesil, who you will all hear from in a minute, who has done for many, many years. She is the founder of the Distinguished Speaker Series at TMCC. And yes, I know. And she started it in the year 2000, so she's been staying strong with this project. I have a nickname for it, Diane. I call it the TT Time Series, like Tea Time Series, but it's not golf. I think it's short for transformation time, because that's really what this is all about. So thank you. And now it is my pleasure to welcome to the podium Diane Chesil, the founder of the TMCC Distinguished Speaker Series.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Doty just told me to calm down, so I'm trying very hard. So on behalf of the Distinguished Speaker Series, I want to welcome everyone here this evening. Maya and I have been discussing hourly about how many people might be here, and I don't think there's an empty seat except the one that Dr. Doty and I were supposed to sit in down there. So this is really, really wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much, especially for coming up on a cold evening and driving up the hill to our campus. We really, really appreciate that. Before the magic begins, I do want to thank our sponsors, the TMCC Student Government Association, which made it possible for students to attend this event free of charge. the Peppermill Resort Spa Casino, Mindful Images Photography, which Dr. Hilgersom just mentioned, whose beautiful photograph is on all of the publicity, and the Speaker Series Committee, and many volunteers, some of whom Dr. Hilgersom already mentioned. So we want to thank all of the help we've had. And it took a lot of help. And these volunteers, they have spread out around the community from nail salons to yoga studios to automobile repair shops. So it's for everyone. And it's been a wonderful journey for myself and for Diane. I know we feel it's part of our journey too, by going around and having these magical moments. And I lastly, although Diane may scold me a bit afterwards, I want to thank her very much for everything she's done. She's professor of English here. She's chair of the DSS committee. She's my world lit teacher and cherished friend. And I'm glad that Dr. Hilgersom asked her to stand because I tried to get her up on the stage and I couldn't succeed. So wherever I've knocked on doors during the past few weeks to tell people about our event, I personally witnessed the openness and compassion that's well and alive in our world. Never doubt that the invitation to enter into your own magic shop is available to each one of you. Perhaps you've already begun that journey. If not, an evening with our speaker tonight is an invitation to take that first step. So thank you once again, and now Dr. Hilgersom will tell you a little more about our speaker. Thank you.
Okay. How's that? Good? No? Now? I feel like a rock star. Like that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, it's my pleasure to introduce James R. Doty, MD, a professor in the neurosurgery department at Stanford University School of Medicine and the founder and director of the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research, of which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor. He obtained his undergraduate degree from the University of California, Irvine, and medical degree from Tulane University. Dr. Doty completed neurosurgical residency at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and obtained board certification in 1990. He is a fellow of both the American College of Surgeons and the International College of Surgeons. He served 9 years on active duty service in the United States Army. That's the official introduction. Now, here is the Karin introduction. Dr. Doty, your wonderful book, Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, has been a significant read for the students, faculty, and even for me, one of your new fans. You have woven many transformative pearls of wisdom related to our human brains and how we can develop through our lives compassion and kindness toward others in a way that deepens us to our very core. I've been engaged with community college students for about 32 years, and the work has been a true blessing for me. I found my calling early. The little boy and the young man that you describe in your book reminded me of hundreds of the community college learners that I taught through the years. Many of these students made it just like you have done. And I don't mean they made it financially. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean they found careers that they really love. They are teachers, they are nurses, they are even auto mechanics, they are welders. And along the way, they found their Ruth, often in the form of a community college faculty member or a community college counselor or a community college staff member. They journeyed into the magic shop, and slowly the unsuspecting, mysterious, life-changing enchantment seeped into their minds, and more importantly, into their hearts. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you this evening, and I will say in advance that I hope you return soon. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. James Doty. Have fun.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Yes. See, I don't even need that. How are you all? Good, good. Well, listen, thank you for coming to see me this evening. That's very kind of you. And thank you, Karen and Diane and my aunt. Was that close? And thank all of you. How many of you have read my book, actually? Good, good. Well, thank you so much for that. So just to do the sort of semi-academic thing, before I start, I just want to tell you I'm part of what we call CCARE, which is the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford. And we really research the value proposition of being compassionate. And when I first started this exploration a decade ago, in academia, if you said you were going to study compassion, either in grad school or as a postdoc, people would tell you that it's an academic dead end. Because the feeling was that this is a soft science, it doesn't really have any meaning, it's more of a religious tenet. And in fact, that's not the case at all. And in fact, we've learned a lot in the last 10 years. And I would say that we're probably one of the leading centers in the world that study compassion. When you act compassionately with intention, it has a profound effect on your physiology in a good way. What that means is that when you see that another person is in need or suffering, it results in you, if you will, opening your heart, at least most people. And when you do that, when you open your heart to care for another person, it has an amazing effect in that your heart rate will lower, your blood pressure decreases, you have a sense of warmth, you want to care, because as a species, we are social animals. Now, you can see me with the Dalai Lama there. He was going to give me a noogie, but I stopped him from that. But he is the founding benefactor of our center, and in fact, the first time I met him, I had been working on this sort of as a side project, and we called it Project Compassion. And one day I was walking through the university, and I had a vision that I wanted the Dalai Lama to come and speak. Now, I have to tell you that I am not religious at all. I was not a follower of the Dalai Lama at all, and in fact, my wife was a follower of the Dalai Lama, and I would be forced to drop her off at events with the Dalai Lama. She now says I stole the Dalai Lama from her. But he and I met because I had this profound vision that wouldn't go away, and I ended up meeting him. And our first meeting, not only did he agree to come to Stanford, but he spontaneously made a donation to the work I was doing, which at that time was the largest donation he'd ever given to a non-Tibetan cause, which was really quite extraordinary. And ultimately, I ended up being the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation and have been blessed to spend many, many hours with him all over the world. And as I was saying, we've done an immense amount of research over the last number of years that really proves in a scientific way the value proposition of being kind and compassionate, which seems sort of strange since compassion is at the core of every religion, yet in secular society we have to somehow prove it with scientific evidence to say that it works, which seems a little crazy, but that's okay. So recently, actually this book came out about 3 months ago, which is actually an academic textbook, because now there is something recognized as a field of compassion science, and this is almost a 600-page tome that covers the entire gamut of this field. And interestingly enough, you know, His Holiness said, if you want to be happy, practice compassion. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. And in fact, science has proven that to be the case. So I did not do this drawing of me. So I wrote this book and called Into the Magic Shop, A Neurosurgeon's Quest to Discover the Mysteries of the Brain and the Secrets of the Heart. And a lot of people have asked me, why would a neurosurgeon write a book like that? What's the connection? And obviously I'm a physician, but that's not the connection at all. And in fact, most people, if I were just to meet them and at least tell them my position, etc., they make an assumption based on my appearance and how I act that I'm well educated, from an affluent background, and that probably my life is pretty good and it's been a perfect trajectory to success. And it's interesting how people judge other people. And we all have a tendency to do that. And in fact, it's part of our evolution. We look at someone, that's how we've evolved as a species, and we make a judgment about them. And the problem is, oftentimes, that judgment is completely wrong. Yet, for many of us, it taints almost every interaction we have with another individual. It can make you think that they're not nice, perhaps. It can make you think they're not of your class, they're not worthy of your time. But of course, on deep reflection, everyone is worthy of your time. So my own personal story, and I hate to repeat some of this for some of you who've read the book, but I grew up in poverty, actually. My father was an alcoholic, frequently unemployed. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child and was partially paralyzed and had a seizure disorder and was chronically depressed and attempted suicide many times. Neither had gone to college, and we were on public assistance essentially as long as I could remember as a child, and we were evicted multiple times. And you know, the tragedy is, in the United States, we have the highest level of childhood poverty of any industrialized country. You know, this is an abomination, and it should not be in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And you know, studies have now shown that when you grow up in that type of environment, the likelihood of you overcoming that is essentially zero. And if you're a person of color, it's almost impossible. And part of it is people make judgments about you and what you're capable of based on your background. And in fact, when I was in college or high school, my high school counselor was kind enough to remind me that I would probably be lucky if I went to trade school. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to trade school at all. In fact, anything that you do in life, which you do with passion and love, and to benefit others is wonderful. But that being said, all of us should be encouraged to try to reach our greatest potential, whatever that is, and not be judged as to what you are or are not capable of. Because you know what happens is, for so many people, is they give that decision to another person to tell them what is possible for them, when in fact, the only person who makes that decision is you. But when you start listening to others, and then you start believing what they tell you. How many of you in this room have come up with an idea that you thought was the most fantastic, or you said you wanted to be something, and you tell somebody, and instead of saying, that is fantastic, you can do anything you want, they go, you can't do that. Has that ever happened to any of you? Exactly. And what happens is that when you hear those types of responses over and over again, you start believing it. And when you start believing it, brick by brick by brick, you create a prison. And what I mean by that is that you start defining your limitations and what is possible for you. And by the time you even realize it, you've got four walls around you, and often you don't know how to escape. As a 12-year-old, I was angry. I was hostile. I had despair, a feeling of hopelessness, because, you know, if you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, you don't think there are any possibilities for you, and then what happens is you give up. And then when you give up, you start listening to what everyone has told you, and that what you become to believe. And so by this time, I was also becoming a very good juvenile delinquent. And one day, I was riding my bike, which was this orange Stingray. And for you older folks over the age of probably 50 or 55, there used to be these Stingray bikes with the banana seat. Anybody remember those? Those are cool. I still have one. So I had saved my money and gotten this bike, and it was my most prized possession. But one day I was riding my bike far away from where I would normally ride my bike, and lo and behold, I'm sure they have strip malls here, right? So I came upon a strip mall, which I had not been to before, and I had actually sort of liked magic, and I had some card tricks I had learned and things, and there was this magic store. So I walked into the magic store. And there was a woman sitting there, and she was a big woman. And she was one of these people, and I know all of you have met someone like this, who has a presence about her and who radiates kindness. And this woman had these glasses perched on her nose with a chain. You guys can figure out what she looks like now. Gray hair that was sort of wavy and long. And she looks up and she smiles at me. And I start asking her about magic. And she says, I don't know anything about magic. This is my son's store. And he's not here. I'm just sitting here while he's doing an errand. And but she looked at me, and she really looked at me. How many of you know the word being present, or words, or presence? Okay. This woman was present. Okay. She wasn't looking at her cell phone, because we didn't have them then. You know, she wasn't watching TV. She looked right at me. and her attention did not waver. In fact, I felt at that moment I was the only thing in her world. Now, normally, with an adult that I didn't know, I would not communicate with them, or certainly not communicate honestly. But she was of that type who I just felt this natural sense of safety and being embraced. And she asked me some penetrating questions about my background, and I told her the truth. And at the end of our discussion, which was about 15 or 20 minutes, she said to me, "You know, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. If you show up every day, I think I can teach you something that could change your life." Now, I wish I could tell you as a 12-year-old that I had insight. I didn't. The only reason I showed up was twofold. One was I had nothing else to do, and the other was she gave me Chips Ahoy cookies. And I showed up every day, and during that period, that interaction with that woman changed fundamentally the trajectory of my life. And I describe this as 4 tricks. And what happened was, and this was before we had even talked in the medical field about neuroplasticity. It was felt that the brain was immutable, could not change. It was before the term mindfulness was used at all. And clearly this woman must have had some background because I think she was part of the love generation and had some exposure to Eastern religions and probably psychedelics. So she said, "You know, if you come, I'll teach you something." And I showed up, and she taught me these 4 tricks, and that I'd like to share with you. What we know now is that if you are not able to attend, if you are not able to be present, you cannot learn. And what unfortunately happens to many of us is that if you have fear, if you have anxiety, if you're stressed, it's hard to be present. And you may or may not know, but in modern society, we have an epidemic of those 3 things. And they lead to a whole number of negative health consequences. The other thing is that as a species, we have the most evolved sense of a past, and the only species that has an understanding of our death. And so 2 things happen. And I'm sure probably never to you, but a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about what could have been, might have been, should have been. Or they're thinking about the future, of which they absolutely have no control. And when you're in those 2 places, where are you not? You're not here. Then you compound that with stress, anxiety, and depression, and you're even more not here. But the problem with stress, anxiety, and depression is that as a result, your muscles are tense, and many people go around with this sense of tenseness, and they don't even realize it. Because, once you've been in that state for a long time, you think that is normal. That becomes your normal mode. When in fact, you should not be in that mode at all. your mode should be open, happy, loving, and wanting to connect. And what people don't realize is that we have this connection between our brains and our hearts and all the other organs in our body. And in fact, it is a pathway through something called the vagus nerve. And when you think certain things, they have a physiologic effect. And this highway is not one way, it's two-way. Okay? Have any of you heard of broken heart syndrome? For those of you who you haven't heard, broken heart syndrome was first described in Japan, but it was the effect of profound stress associated with a emotional or relationship breakup, which in a number of instances led to sudden cardiac death. That is the power of stress and its negative effect on your body. As a species, and I'm not using my slides because I'm not very good at this, but as a species, our DNA has not changed in the last 200,000 years. We are the exact creatures that were on the savannah in Africa. And so 99% of essentially our time or our history has been as hunter-gatherers. We went to sleep when it was dark. We woke up when it was light. We slept a lot. We ate a lot, and we did one other thing a lot, which you can probably guess what that was. But the thing is that it was a low-key existence. Now, it was not an existence that was threat-free, but in those areas where there was threat, you had what's called your flight or fight system, right? And this is due to your autonomic nervous system, and the part of that is associated with the flight or fight mechanism is the sympathetic nervous system. And so what happens if, let's say, you were out 200,000 years ago on the savannah, and you saw some grass move, and we really looked good at recognizing patterns, and that's associated with the lion in the grass. Your heart would start beating, your blood pressure would go up, your sphincter might briefly loosen and then tighten. And then you would run as fast as you could and hopefully get up a tree, and the threat would go away, and if you didn't make it, it didn't really matter, right? And that was a very good system for that. But unfortunately, that's the same system we have today because our evolution has not kept up with the pace of technology and modernity, and as a result, we have the same mechanism. So we were not meant to have phones ring, to have talking on your computer, to watch TV, to have all this stimulation, much of which is negative. And the thing is, when you see negative things, they're the things that stick, because theoretically, that is what is potentially a threat to you. And that's why politicians are so wonderful at creating threat. You see, because if you create threat, that creates fear, that pulls you in, you're no longer looking outward or being open, and it's a great way to manipulate you with fake news. As a result, a lot of people in modern society live in a constant state of fear and anxiety, and they don't even know it sometimes. 20 to 25% of adults are on some form of anxiety medication or on antidepressants. And those numbers have actually gone up in children about 20 or 30-fold in the last few decades. So children on antidepressants and all of these other things. And so how do you cope with this? How do you cope with the stresses of modern society? So, as I was saying, as a child, I had immense stress, anxiety, fear, and actually shame. Because when you're a child and these things happen to you, you internalize that it's because of you. It has something to do with you, and you carry that with you. And what this woman in this magic shop, whose name was Ruth, taught me was this reality. And the first thing she had me do was to sit, and with intention, beginning at my toes and going all the way up to the top of my head, to just relax each part of my body and to slowly breathe in and out. And what we now know when you do that is that that shifts you from stimulation of your sympathetic nervous system to shift you over to your parasympathetic nervous system. And often that's called your rest and digest system. It's also associated with enhancement of your executive control function. Have any of you heard of that? That's the part of your brain that utilizes memory, experience, to make discerned judgment. If you're anxious or stressed, you're in survival mode. That part of your brain shuts down, and as a result, you oftentimes don't make the best decisions when you're stressed and anxious. The other thing is that when you're in that mode, you're more creative, you have more energy, you're more productive. So that's the first thing that she taught me, because when you're in that mode, you're not looking around wondering what's going to happen. You're not afraid. You feel safe, and now you're present. Okay? So that's the first thing that she taught me. Now, at first, as a 12-year-old, I thought she was nuts, and I had never done anything like that, and it was very hard for me to sit still. But after a few weeks, I learned how to do that. And it was amazing, because for the first time in my life, I just felt this burden lifted. And so after that, what she taught me was this thing which I mentioned a little bit earlier about self-criticism. How many of you have that voice that goes on in your head, right? And it tells you you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not attractive enough, whatever the you're not is. And this is this thing that lays those bricks down that creates your prison. And I didn't realize that I had, in a very wonderful way, created that. Because I said can't all the time. I can't do this. I can't do that. And by definition, once you say that you can't, it is impossible to do. And the thing is, you're the only one who gives yourself permission to do or not do something. No one else. So she made me understand that there was this negative dialogue going on in my head, and I thought that that dialogue was me. I thought when that negative stuff came in, it was because it was true, because it was coming from me, but in fact, it had nothing to do with me. It was a construct that I had created that limited me from reaching my own potential and allowing me to be free to be anything that I chose to be. So once she taught me that, it was an incredible revelation. And then what she made me understand was that it was within my power to change that narrative. And this is now a whole field called self-compassion. And there's a woman by the name of Kristen Neff who's really developed that field. And a number of studies show how important it is, because if you're always beating yourself up, this also creates negative emotional reactions to that negative dialogue. Okay, and these are physiologic reactions. This can cause depression of your immune system. It can result in the chronic release of stress hormones, which on a short-term basis are very helpful. On a long-term basis, have very negative consequences. It actually is associated with impairment of cardiac function and also with an effect on your peripheral vascular system. Essentially, every organ in your body is negatively affected by stress, anxiety. And the thing is, what we also don't appreciate is that events in and of themselves have no emotional content. I use the analogy, an event is like a black and white picture. By the time you put it in your memory, you have painted that picture with emotional content. And it's that picture that sits in your head. And every time you bring it up, you have it all colored in that paint that you have painted it with. Now, of course, interestingly, you can have two people at the same event, and of course, their paintings are dramatically different, aren't they? Yet you insist your painting is the correct painting, right? And this is where problems happen. And the thing is, it's also where suffering comes from. Because you keep putting the stack of these pictures in your head with all that emotional content, much of which is negative, and you relive this over and over and over. And you know, for children in these types of environments like my own, there's something called adverse childhood experiences. And we now know, through the work of a number of scientists, that when these add up, when you have drugs, alcohol, mental illness, poverty, violence, et cetera, these have a huge, huge negative impact on a child's ability to attend, to thrive, and essentially, many of these children, their lives are ruined. Children who had extraordinary potential. And so she taught me how to change the dialogue, not to one of being critical, but to be kind to myself, to love myself, to understand that every human being has failings, makes mistakes, has failures, does stupid stuff, sometimes over and over, but they're still worth being loved, and you're still worth being loved. It's the nature of every one of us. Yet some of us can't let us off the hook to love ourselves. It's very, very hard for some people. So that was the next thing that she taught me. And you know, it is hard to love others and to have an open heart if you keep beating up yourself and not being kind and loving to yourself. You know, the other problem is that, how many of you have heard of blue zones? So these are parts of the world where people routinely live to be 100. And the thing about blue zones is, while diet is a part of it, in many of these areas, these people smoke like fiends and drink wine like fiends, right? Yet they still live to be 100. And the reason is, though, that in these societies, even today, these are places where people grew up their entire lives and have lived their entire lives. They have multi-generational families that they live with. They have known their neighbors their entire lives. And guess what? These people have seen you naked. They've seen you poop on yourself. They've seen you at your worst. They've seen you at your best. And they love you. You see, and when you're loved like that, unconditionally, without judgment, then your physiology works at its best. and that's why you live to be over 100. And the thing is, each of us has it within ourselves to also give that gift to another person. But it's hard, isn't it? Because we judge. And oftentimes we judge ourselves very harshly, which leads to harsh judgments of others. Yet none of us is perfect at all. So that was the next thing that she taught me, was that when I can love myself, that allows me the best possibility to love others. Because if you're always beating up on yourself, it blinds you to the suffering of other people because you're so focused on your own issues, right? You're always saying, God, this is screwed up. But there are other people who are having problems just as bad or worse than you. So getting back to modern society and these blue zones. In modern society, we don't live oftentimes with our parents or our grandparents, right? We don't live with our siblings. We live in places where we may not know anybody. And there are people who go to work every day and they may superficially say hello, but they don't really know the person next to them because they're afraid. They're afraid of being judged if they reveal themselves. So what happens to so many people is that you carry a projection of yourself, how you want people to see you. And it's not your authentic self. It's I did this, I did that, I accomplished this, but it's not the one that says, I go home and cry every night. It's not the one that says, you know, my father died, and it hurts. And the problem is when you're not able to be authentic, then the other person can't be authentic. And they're always holding back. And I will tell you that when I give talks, and if my voice breaks, usually that gives permission for everyone else to start crying. Right? And it's okay, as long as somebody tells you it's okay. But oftentimes we won't do it. But when you do that, I have never had an instance where I have told someone I am suffering and they haven't wanted to hold me. Now, sometimes I use it to meet girls. I'm just kidding. There are a lot of guys going, hey, that's a good idea. So the third thing that Ruth taught me was really this idea of opening my heart and to be authentic and to, as best as I could, because it's very hard, to be non-judgmental. You know, I remember I used to work in a liquor store when I was in college, and there was this guy who would come in disheveled every day. It looked like he'd, fallen asleep drunk. He bought a quart of vodka every day. And it pained me to see this, but I made a judgment about him. And I didn't treat him very nice. And one day I was really mean to him, and he confronted me. And he told me the story of his wife being killed by a drunk driver. And after that, how his life unraveled. And he actually had been a college professor. And he said, what right did I have to judge? Because that's what I had done. And that justified me not being nice to him. And what's even worse is my own father was an alcoholic. So that gave me a very deep understanding. And what's interesting, though, he and I ended up becoming friends. And he would start coming by and we would chat instead of, and over time, he went from a quart to a pint. And then he actually finally stopped drinking. And with each step, he started looking more and more the dignified person he was, because he had his dignity back, he had respect, and because he demanded it, frankly, from me. But he gave me the gift of sharing that with him. And then, the last thing that Ruth taught me was a technique of visualization and clarity of intention. And we now know that, and this is, athletes choose this, they visualize either their tennis stroke or whatever it is, and we now know that when they do that, that actually has an effect on their brain. And it has a profound effect. And we know that if you use your voice, if you write it down, if you visualize it, every one of these things strengthen your intention, and while it will not guarantee that what you want will occur, it is more likely than not that if it is possible, that using those techniques will. And I thought as a 12-year-old, what that meant was I said, I want this, and then it's an absolute straight line to getting it. But that was not true. There were hills and valleys and detours. But if my purpose was, if you will, pure and not selfish, if I really used these techniques, seemingly it had a profound effect. And that allowed me to go to medical school, graduate from college. Well, I didn't graduate from college, I guess. But go to college, go to medical school. I did graduate from medical school. Become a neurosurgeon, become a professor, and I also became a successful entrepreneur. I was CEO of a company, a medical device company that went public for $1.2 billion. And all the money I made from that, I gave away to charity, every penny. And what happened in that was that I had chased what I thought would make me happy. Because as a 12-year-old, if you don't have control, you think what you want is money. You think what you want is position. You think what you want is power, because what does that do, you think? You think it gives you control. And then if you have control, everything is perfect. And of course, none of us have control at all. And so what happened to me was, here I had, quote unquote, everything. And I had Porsches, Ferraris, I lived in big houses, I had private jets. And every day I would go home miserable and wake up miserable. Because that 12-year-old, one, was still trying to prove something, to overcome that emptiness, and also fill that emptiness with what I thought would fill it. And what happened is, at the peak of my success, and I was very involved with the .com stuff, in 6 weeks, I lost $80 million and was bankrupt. And you know, it's interesting, when you have a lot of loans out and you lose everything, your best friend suddenly becomes your banker because he's the one who wants to hang out with you. And so I had to get rid of my villa in Florence, my penthouse, my cars, and this put me in a very introspective mode. Introspective because here I had what I thought was everything, and this woman had truly changed the trajectory of my life. And so I went into a period of reflection, and while I was never mean and I was never not nice per se, my focus though was on me. And when I lost everything, I went back to my time with Ruth, and I realized that what makes you happy is not me, but we. So this company that I had run that went public had not gone public yet, and I had made some obligations to charity. And what I did was I gave every share of that stock away to charity, everything. And it was shocking that suddenly then I gave away tens and tens of millions of dollars when I was bankrupt, but that truly was the greatest gift that I had ever received because it put me on my present course and really has been the most fulfilling thing that has happened to me. Now, I'm going to give you some interesting examples of intention and how you don't appreciate what can happen. So when I was in 4th grade, there was a doctor who came and visited my class for Careers Day. He was a pediatrician. And this person treated me like I was important. And he was so kind that I, at that moment, decided I was going to become a doctor. Now, wanting to become a doctor and becoming a doctor, slightly different things. And again, this was where I interacted with my wonderful guidance counselor who told me that I should consider trade school, even though I told her I wanted to be a doctor. Now, wouldn't you think that what her job should have been saying, that's fantastic, you may have some troubled times, but I'm going to outline a path. Maybe you should go to junior college or community college, strengthen your skills, then you'll have your best shot, right? No. She basically told me that wasn't possible, and I should just forget it. Now, fortunately, by this time, of course, I had been with Ruth, and I just never went back to see this woman again. But the way I got into college was as follows. I was in a science class, and I looked over, and there was this girl sitting next to me, and she was filling out her college application. And that was truly the first time I even knew it was time to apply to college, to show you how off I was, right? And I asked her what she was doing. She said she was filling her college application out. I said, oh, really? And she said, yes. And she said, well, haven't you done yours? And I said, no, I haven't received mine yet. And she said, I said to her, I said, well, where are you going to college? And she said, UC Irvine. And she looked at me and she said, where are you going? And I said, UC Irvine. And she said, well, I have an extra application. And that's how I applied to college. I applied to one college, got into one college. Now, getting into college is one thing. Getting good grades is another thing. And if you have absolutely no mentors, no background, no understanding, nobody to help you, it becomes an extraordinary challenge. And again, talking about wonderful friends, you know, I had friends from fairly affluent backgrounds who reminded me that I would never go to medical school because my grades weren't that good. Okay, and they sort of like to rub it in. And When it came time to apply to med school, the average grade point average to get into med school at that time was 3.79. My GPA was 2.53. And it turned out at that time, am I going over time? Can I still talk? Do you want me to keep talking for a few more minutes? What happened was that we had this pre-med committee you would have to interview with. So I go to have my interview, to make an appointment. The woman says to me, the secretary, she says, "I'm not giving you an appointment." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because it's a waste of everyone's time." Now, who has the right to tell another human being they're a waste of their time? So I looked at this well-meaning woman, and I said, "Well, I appreciate that, but I'm not leaving until you give me an appointment, and if you want to call security, that's fine, but I'm not leaving." So she gave me an appointment, and it was so wonderful because when I came for my appointment, there are 3 professors sitting at the end of a table, sitting like this. And you know what that body language means, right? And the guy in the center has my file, and he picks it up and he throws it on the table, and he says, "Say what you want to say, and let's get this over with." So I looked at the gentleman, and I said, "Who gave you the right to destroy people's dreams?" There's not one shred of evidence that above a certain GPA, if you have above average intelligence, that you can't become an excellent doctor. It is an artificial criteria to keep people out. And I said, "I am not going to let you objectify me. I'm not going to let you not look at me as a human being." So I lectured them for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, they were all crying. And the reason is because you cannot look away from a human being if you force somebody not to objectify them. You cannot look away. It is in our DNA. So they ended up actually giving me the highest letter of recommendation that you could get. And then what happened is that secretary, as I left, she said, "You know, I think this could help you." And she was smiling because she'd been listening to this conversation. And it was a brochure to Tulane University for a summer program for students from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds and for minority students. And she said to me, "You know, the deadline's passed, though, for this program." But she says, "I don't think that'll affect you, though." So I called this woman. She let me into the program. I applied to one med school, and I got accepted to one med school, and I didn't have a degree. And so fast forward, and then I'll finish up here because you guys probably want to go off and do something else. So after Hurricane Katrina, Tulane is in New Orleans, they actually moved the university to Baylor, and the library had been damaged, and the dean resigned because he went into a depression about the whole situation. They were trying to recruit a new dean from Harvard, and that dean, that applicant who they wanted an endowed chair. Do you guys know what an endowed chair is? It's an academic honor where a contributor donates a lot of money, and then the professorship is named after that person. So when that happened, actually, I ended up endowing that chair. So The dean is the Doty professor. I set up a multi-million-dollar scholarship in the name of that lady who let me into the program. And I rebuilt the library. And I'm the largest donor from any graduate or faculty person. And the point of that is not to talk about me, but to show you that you can never, ever predict what another is capable of doing. And that you can be extraordinarily, extraordinarily surprised by people who you make judgments about. So, in closing, what Ruth taught me was really how I changed how I interacted with the world, changed how the world interacted with me. And each of us here today has the ability every day to have a positive impact, no matter who you are, no matter your station in life, to have a positive impact on another human being. And that simple impact can change the trajectory of that person's life. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Kind enough to entertain a few questions?
No.
No, I thought not.
Of course. Sure. Who has a question? Yes, ma'am. So this is actually interesting. But I think everything's interesting. So about 9 months later, I hadn't seen Ruth. My life had, even in that short a period of time, everything changed. So I went back on my bicycle and rode out to this strip mall, and I got there, and it was dusk, and this was in the high desert in Lancaster, California, or hell, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. Actually, there are a lot of nice people in Lancaster. I don't know any of them, but no. No. So I drove back to the strip mall, and there was a fence around it, and all the stores were empty, and they were tearing it down. And it was very strange because it was almost as if this was a dream. And as I'm looking at this, and the wind is sort of blowing as it's dusk, this big tumbleweed comes and hits me, and that was it. Now, when I researched the book, because I wanted to be sure I was factually correct, because in some ways this was so bizarre, right? But I tracked down her grandson and confirmed all the stuff that I knew about her and her son. And so she was there just for me. And if you haven't read the book, it's interesting because in it turns out that the parents, Ruth, her son owned the magic store. He was divorced. His child, the son, who was my age, lived with his ex-wife away from there. And about a week or two before I met Ruth, he and the ex-wife had gotten into a fight, and the son was supposed to spend the summer with the father. And Ruth was there specifically to spend the summer with her grandson. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question about Ruth, too. So most of us in this room, probably everyone in the room is a teacher or a learner, educator in some way. These are really big lessons that Ruth was teaching this 12-year-old boy. So what made her such an effective teacher? How was it that you were able to learn such big lessons?
Well, if you're present and your care, a child knows it. I really think that's all it takes. Because, children who are in these types of situations, they're not cared for. They're lonely. They feel isolated. They feel that their experience is different from other children, and they're ashamed, and they don't want to tell about their situation. They don't want to say they're hungry. But if somebody takes the time and shows them unconditional acceptance, that changes everything. And that's the power each of us has. Yes, young man.
Mr. Doty, I would like to say thank you for sharing your experiences. 2 questions for you. The first one is, I'm assuming at some point in your life you were a young man, and
I still am. What the hell, dude?
that was a joke. That was a joke. But I read your book, and for the youth that are going to be going through this, for the young ones that can see something bad is about to happen in the horizon, or for those of us who have experienced bad stuff and is still stuck inside of us, what action would you recommend? Something simple. I know it might be an unfair question, but something simple that we can do or even recommend for others who are going through a tough time. What would that be? That's the first question.
Well, first of all, not be afraid to reach out to somebody because you're not alone. When so many people have read my book and have said, geez, you described my life, or you described part of my life, or this so resonates with me. Because, when we're struggling, we often think we're the only person struggling. And again, when you share your story, what you need, oftentimes it may be outside of your normal circle, but there are people who really, really care and will reach out. Now, sometimes that's not the case. The other thing is, if you can sit and recognize that those bad circumstances don't mean you're bad. Because as a child, you process that this is happening to you because you deserve it. And in some ways, this is what predators use or others to manipulate and harm people. So you have to sit and know that what is happening doesn't represent you at all. And also, have the courage to not accept the situation. So now, again, I don't mean to sound simplistic because some of the situations are obviously very tragic and you cannot do anything about them. But
So basically show love, which leads me to my second question.
one more.
One more, I know. How long do you think before our physicians start prescribing love as a medication?
I do it every day, but you're right. There are 2 issues about that. One is, we have created a healthcare system based on illness, not wellness, right? I tell people, I give a different lecture, but I'll give part of it right now. If I told you that I had created a pill that the ingredients were readily available, there were no side effects, easy to manufacture, and cost essentially nothing as far as the ingredients, and it would prevent or improve 80% of all diseases or cure them, how much would that pill be worth? Right? An amazing amount of money. And so what I say is the pill already exists. The only requirement is you sit in silence for 20 minutes by meditating, being present, and that improves your physiology that stays with you. By doing those simple actions, you can have a huge, huge positive effect on your own health and avoid a lot of these medications. And we do know that love is a cure for many, many things. So never be sparing in your love because you have it unlimited.
Grad school or you know, they have like futures to think of. Like it's hard for us to not like just be present because what we do right now is going to determine our future, and so we're constantly living in the future. So what kind of advice do you have for us, you know, to like calm ourselves down? And like you, I feel like you got really lucky. Like you got into all the schools like that you like applied. You only applied like once to that school and you got it. You know, like that's not like that for a lot of us, I feel.
You're correct. And in fact, even my own residency, you know, the Army paid my way through medical school. And I decided actually at the last minute to become a neurosurgeon. And in the middle of my internship, and everyone had already applied for their residencies. And it also turns out that to become a neurosurgeon, there's a waiting list of 3 years if you're accepted. So I took my vacation and spent a month at Walter Reed rotating on the neurosurgery service to sort of show them who I was. And so I met with the chairman, and I said, well, you know, I want to apply, and I expect to be here next year. And he laughed at me, of course. And he said, well, Jim, I'd love to have you here. I can, you know, offer you a position in 3 years, but it's 3 years. And I said, that's unacceptable. So I laughed again. And interestingly enough, what happened is the guy who had been slotted for that position in the upcoming year, he ended up dating the head nurse of neurosurgery, and she broke up with him. Then he started stalking her, and she told the chairman of the department, and he sent that person who had the position to Korea and gave me his position. Now, it took a lot to pay that nurse. That's because I was dating. No, that just happened. But to answer your question, you're right. Listen, if you want to achieve things, you have to compete, and it is very difficult and challenging. But I will assure you, the more you worry, that makes your likelihood of success less than better. Because when you worry, when you have anxiety, we talked about how that stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, decreases your ability to have discerning thought, decreases your creativity. So the other reality is all the stuff you do, the outcome is the outcome, right? And if you get in, you get in. If you don't, you don't. And all the worry there. So, and I know that may sound simplistic, and I'm not saying meditation is the answer for everything, because it's not. And in fact, mindfulness in the hands of some people can actually make them more ruthless and a better focused, ruthless person. And in fact, that's why we developed something called a compassion cultivation program, because, you know, learning to relax or doing a body survey, learning not to have that response to negative self-talk is important, but without self-compassion, without opening your heart, a type A person can use those first 2 steps just to become a more ruthless type A person. But, so that's a possibility. But ideally, if you can relax, because that'll just help you do better, if you can not worry so much, that's not to take it completely away, but you know, look, academics is very hard, and especially if you're getting a PhD, it's really hard, and it's brutal sometimes, and that's the system. The other question you have to ask is, do you want to be in that system, right? Because, you know, I know people who they struggle, and I will tell you also, you will meet those ruthless people who want to win at all cost. That's who you're competing against. So you have to decide what your values are, and is it worth it? Because once you get your PhD or whatever, you're also going to meet more ruthless people. And it's always fascinating to me because the same people go, well, I'm going to do this to get ahead, and once I get ahead, it'll all be good, and I'll be a nice person. You're not going to be you're going to be just as ruthless, okay? So you just have to decide, is that the environment you want? Now, I will tell you, Stanford is a somewhat competitive place, okay? And by every criteria known to man, probably I should not be there, okay? But, and I am not ruthless at all. And in fact, what I try to do is I always try to be generous, thoughtful, kind, and to do my thing. I'm not competing against anybody. And that's the other thing. You are doing this for you. You're not competing against anyone. When you start competing against anyone, that's where these issues come up. Okay? So I do my thing. And oftentimes in those situations where we have ruthless people, they are ruthless and criticize and manipulate, and they use this thing, well, they're just like me, right? And it justifies. I'm not just like them, and I'm not going to get engaged in that. And in some ways that protects me because a lot of people actually help me and reach out and do me good, because that's always how I function. So that's all I can tell you. Yes, ma'am. Well, the question was, how long did I practice Ruth's magic or techniques after I left her? And actually, I really got into meditation, where I was meditating 2 or 3 hours a day for years. And I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone. But for me, it was helpful. And I stopped doing it when I got very successful. And that was my downfall. Right? You know, people say, geez, I don't have enough time to meditate 20 minutes a day. And do you know what the saying is about that? If you don't have time enough, 20 minutes a day, that means you should be doing it an hour a day. Yes?
So we know on a personal level that stress affects the individual, and even in physically damaging as far as, cardiac arrest, even to that point. What is your advice as far as how your stress can damage the people closest to you? You can't exactly always turn to them for a support system.
Well, it can be horrible, right?
Like, how can you help them without also jeopardizing your own?
So you mean people who are stressed and externally exhibiting that stress through their behaviors?
Yes.
Well, that can be really hard. Some people say, the teacher comes when the student's ready. Sometimes the student's not ready. But my advice is that you can try the best you can. At some point, though, you have to protect yourself and do what's best for you, and recognize that the other person is on their path and that they may not either choose to or be in a position to or want to change. Most negative behaviors like that are due to deep suffering, unfortunately. Right? A lot of bullies, a lot of people who are violent are externally expressing the deep, horrible pain that they have. It's easy for us to condemn somebody who's done a heinous act, but if you look at their lives oftentimes, it's not surprising, right? Yeah. 90% of the people who are in prison, they're not there because they're evil. Do you know why they're there? Because they didn't have love. But the most important thing is you have to take care of yourself. Because what happens, especially when you grow up in these difficult situations, is you are trying to fix people.
So would you say that in being non-judgmental, having compassion, and essentially loving yourself and showing that love, you're either going to help the other person or not, but essentially you're doing the best that you can.
You are doing the best you can. And sometimes that's all each of us can do. But again, if it puts you in harm's way, you should not do it.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, ma'am. How are you? Doctor.
My question is this. With your research and understanding neuroplasticity, when you look at children, the being present and care does profound effect. My question is, does your research compare a child to an adult where the neuroplasticity is a little bit more fixed? Is there a difference, and how much is there, if there is one?
Well, I don't know that literature, and that's not necessarily what I study, but I know a little bit. And children can be extraordinarily resilient with lots of love, and even adults, a prisoner. The problem is that what happens oftentimes with prisoners, and we've seen it play out in different scenarios, is that someone will reach out to them and actually give them love, and they will respond to it, okay? The problem that can happen, though, is, if you have used survival mechanisms from birth that include violence, when you are stressed big time, oftentimes you revert back to that. So we see instances where somebody seems to have been rehabilitated, and oftentimes it's played out like with celebrities. They get involved with a prisoner and get him out. Then he'll go out to, a bar somewhere, and somebody will say something, and it'll trigger him, and then they'll become extraordinarily violent. And it's because suddenly they're fearful again, they don't feel safe, and it's like people who speak, let's say English is not their first language. I see this in the hospitals, right? They come into the hospital, if they're completely stressed or in severe pain, they revert back to their first language, right? Because that's what they feel comfortable with. That's what they've had, that's what they've lived with. Even myself, if I get in a situation sometimes, I can start heading down a very dark path, right? Because those behaviors allowed me to survive. And now it wasn't helpful to me ultimately, but allowed me to survive at that moment. Fortunately, with a lot of work, I can sit with my shadow, which all of us have, and I know I can't make him go away. He's part of me, so I have to accept that, live with it, know that's part of me, and do the best I can with that shadow. But if you've not met your shadow and you try to force it away, it'll come back and haunt you. Yes?
This might affect a lot of the students who are just finishing school and starting out in life, and some people like me who ripen a little slower and find out, later in life our calling, and we have all these compassion and life lessons and failures behind us. And we want to help others so much, but the only thing that's holding us back is fear and self-confidence. One really good thing I know is to try to focus on the other person to overcome that fear, because they say, you focus on yourself when that's holding you back. But is there any other tips that you could give us?
Well, you also have to appreciate that. As an example, if a mother has 3 children and she's the sole breadwinner, she may want to aspire to do something, but the reality is she may have to sacrifice her dream to care for her children. And whether that's fair or not, that often is a reality. But doing that actually is an extraordinary act of compassion and selflessness. But I would acknowledge to you that my own trajectory is unusual, right? For me to have come as far as I've come. But that being said, I think that being passionate, being authentic, caring, and maintaining your vision or your clarity of intention, then if it's going to happen, that's the path that will most likely make it happen. And the thing, though, is there's a difference between what we think we want and what we need or really want. And this is the difference between what we call hedonic happiness or pleasure, right, or avoiding pain, or the excitement you feel when you get stuff, versus eudaimonia happiness, which is more in the realm of contentment, meaning. That's a different type of happiness. Yet that's the happiness, though, that at the end of your days, you want to say that was your life, a life of meaning. The only way you have a life of meaning, I think there's a slide here, and this talks about some other things, is being of service to others. And, you know, a lot of people chase wealth, position, but we know that beyond a certain income, you don't get any happier. Because, you know, happiness is not an external thing. Happiness is an internal thing. And, you know, they say there cannot be peace in the world until you have inner peace. And that's the most important thing. And all the things in the world, all the cars, the houses, whatever, will not give inner peace. It'll make you feel fairly comfortable for a while, but it won't give inner peace. Any other questions? Okay, this young lady here sitting next to this very handsome man with the beard has a question.
Which handsome man? There are lots of handsome men.
Yes, whichever one that is there. There's so many beautiful women over there. I'm like overcome.
Thank you. You mentioned the vagus nervous system having a two-way connection, and you didn't mention much more about that. Is there a significance of the two-way connection, and what is it?
Well, as an example, you have a lot of nervous connections from the vagus into your stomach. And we now know that something called your microbiome stimulates those nerves to give signals to your brain. Okay? And we also know that there are certain areas in the heart that will signal your brain based on other hormones. So there's a profound effect on your brain from information being obtained from essentially all the organs in your body. And we know that diet now has a relationship to depression in some situations, and also in terms of health in general. Yes?
I love the science and spirituality connection. That's my big passion in life. And so when you were talking about the walls that we build, meditation for me, and I wish the young lady was sitting here, what it does for me is it enables me to shut that voice off, the voice of I can't. And when I shut that voice off, I hear possibilities. So that, to me, I think is now science, and in your field, we're finding that the body is creating what the mind is thinking. So you are teaching us, and Ruth taught you, a very simple thing, and I'm a substitute teacher, and I was at Annie's school yesterday in 5th grade class, and we did the study of water and emotions on water, and I showed this to 5th grade class. And it's not too big of a concept.
Well, the problem is we underestimate the ability of our children to process information. And they know a heck of a lot more than that they can understand. And these concepts, they know about love, they know about caring, they know about how it affects them, they know about stress, they know when they hurt.
Yeah, they're more intelligent, I think, emotionally than we are because they haven't dumbed it down. And so that's what I love about meditation, and I'm kind of new to it, but that it helps me to shut my voice off. And then this way you just didn't take no for an answer. Sometimes when I shut that voice off, then the potential shows up.
No, I think that's exactly right, because, like I said, oftentimes we are our worst critic and we limit ourselves. And suddenly, when you realize that you have unlimited possibilities, I mean, there are people who can run 100 miles, straight. There are people who've done the most extraordinary things. Have any of you seen this guy? I think he's from Belgium. What's his name? He's the guy who goes out in the cold. Like he tried to climb Everest in shorts and bare feet. Seriously. Because he used a technique that monks used to adjust their body temperature. And this is, I'm sure you've all heard of the placebo effect. You could give somebody a placebo and tell them it's a placebo, and it still has the effect. Okay? And this is simply what you don't understand is you have that ability in you to do these things. And when you believe it, that's when things start changing. This is these instances where, let's say, a car falls off a jack and somebody runs over and picks it up. It is in you, it is with you, it is available to you. You just have to believe it.
This is the really hard part of my job, is to come to a closure, so to speak. There's no closure, yeah. We are, exactly. It's beginning and it's going on. But first of all, I don't know how to express our gratitude, and I know that you made a wonderful commitment to come here this evening for us, and it means so much. And I have two more. What's happening? Oh, don't touch the mic. All right. I would like to remind you that Dr. Doty's kind enough to do book signings, and you may have a book, but if you don't, we have them for sale here, right behind the stage in the bookstore, so you can get your book there. And the table is over in that way, in that corner. So and lastly, something very important, I would like to ask Andy Horstmanshoff, please, to come to the stage, because we have, you got it? We have a gift of gratitude for Dr. Doty, and this is the image which Andy, my friend, took, and we would like to present this to you as a thank you. This is a gift from the Distinguished Speaker Series and Mindful Images.